Welcome to the BeTempered podcast, where we explore the art of finding balance in a chaotic world. Join us as we delve into insightful conversations, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you navigate life's ups and downs with grace and resilience. I'm your host, Dan Schmidt, and together let's embark on a journey to live our best lives. This is BeTempered.
Welcome, everybody, to the BeTempered podcast. We're excited today to have one of my best friends, one of my college roommates, teammates, Shawn Eddy, is joining us today from Dallas, Texas. So, Shawn, welcome to the BeTempered podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. This is obviously, you've heard the other podcast. It's a new venture for me and for Ben and I together, and trying to figure out and navigate where to go with this. Believe it or not, you're one of the smarter people that I know. Not that you're like Ivy League smart or anything like that. I don't want you to get a big head. But you are very intelligent, and you've done a lot of, I know you think not unique things in your life, but you have. You kind of lived in different parts of the country, been involved with different businesses, both big and small, and raising a family, have a child in college playing a Division I sport, and so we wanted to talk to you and just kind of learn your story and talk about your family and all the good things you've done in your life. So if I didn't know you and I met you, tell me about it. What do you do? Tell me about where you're from and where you're at now.
Sure. Well, first of all, you need smarter friends if I'm in the upper echelon.
I agree.
I started the first year of my life living on an island. That was an island in the middle of the Ohio River, so not as glamorous as you might think when I say that.
Going with that.
But I honestly don't even remember it. But I lived there for the first year of my life. It's an island that's about a mile wide and 2 miles long. I still have family there to this day. It's kind of a neat place. All the homes, or most of the homes, are those old shotgun style, San Francisco type homes. I think I was 1 year old when I moved to a little town in Eastern Ohio called Yorkville, which was an old town in the Rust Belt. There's a galvanizing plant that actually was just taken down recently. But the town existed because of that plant. And just up the road from there was a town where my mother was from, and it was an old coal mining town. And in the truest sense of the word, or the form of the old company towns, that's what this was. The mine, the company that owned the mine owned the town. They built the homes, they built the store. So if you worked for the mine, you lived in the town, you lived in one of their homes, you bought their groceries from the company store. There's that old song called 16 Tons, where there's a line in it about, I owe my soul to the company store. It was very much in that sense. My mother, when she was younger, would run up to get a pack of cigarettes for my grandmother and maybe a piece of candy for her effort. And it just went on store credit. There's no cash that was transacted. It was just putting on a ledger. And at the end of the week, when you got your paycheck, anything that you had spent came out of that check. Your rent came out of it. If you were lucky enough to have utilities, they would charge you for that utilities. My mother didn't have running water until she was 18 years old.
Jeez.
So, very, very humble start to my life, right? The little town Yorkville, I lived there till I was 8 years old. And then, economic woes had forced my dad to look for work elsewhere. And that took me to Columbus, Ohio, with, the rest of my family, which was just the four of us. It was my mom, my dad, and my younger sister. So moved to Columbus and had a pretty standard childhood. went to school. Mom worked out of the home doing childcare. My dad was a plumber or a maintenance guy, depending on the year. Played local sports for the community, a little bit of football, a little bit of baseball, some basketball, a year soccer, stuff like that. Pretty humble, standard, I'd call it middle class lifestyle. So nothing too crazy. I was always a big kid. I had a November birthday, and my parents held me back from starting school as early as I could have. So when I did start kindergarten, I was basically a year older than everyone else, and because of my genetics, I would have been bigger than anyone in the class had I started on time, so to speak. So just a big kid fumbling through life. I did have an unfortunate experience with a pair of corduroys in 6th grade. On a hot day, I decided to wear them and was chased by a dog, and ran a little further than I thought I could at the time. And by the time I got to my house, my inner thighs were on fire from the friction caused by the corduroys. But so hopefully that paints a little bit of picture of who I was and what I looked like back then. But went on to play.
I wondered if you were going to talk about the court. There was a couple. Obviously, I know all the stories or most of them, and the corduroy story is one that will live in infamy. So, if you can picture this big portly kid running down the sidewalk with corduroy pants on. Why were you wearing corduroys? Was it like dress up?
Well, so this is the problem. I mean, I deserve every bit of what I got with this because, as you can imagine, being my size, I had to shop at the Husky section at JCPenney, right? So we go back to school shopping, and they have these pair of corduroys that I just thought were the coolest things in the world. So the first day of school, I'm going to rock these things. And it's August in Columbus, and it can still, it can be pretty hot in Ohio. So I'm sure it was in the lower 90s with some humidity. And there was this dog that was on a chain in the front yard of a house that was close to our bus stop. Well, when we were playing during the summer, we'd always ride our bikes past this dog, and the dog would run to the end of its chain trying to chase us, and it would get yanked back by its chain. And we all thought it was funny, and we would probably ride by more than we were supposed to, just to see the dog get choked, right? And it was a mean thing. Well, I get off the bus from school that day, and I'm walking past the dog, and the dog run towards me, and I stop knowing it's going to get stopped by its chain. Well, the chain breaks, and now the dog is chasing me. And so I just took off running, and I was surprisingly fast, but I was, still a big kid. The dog would catch up to me, and I'd turn around and I'd give him a kick, and he'd kind of roll over, and he'd get up and chase me again. So this went on all the way until I got to my house, and I finally got to the front door and got in the house, and I'm standing there in the foyer, out of shape, out of breath, right? Hands on my knees trying to catch my breath. And then I realized just how hot my thighs were from the friction created from running. So I quickly undo my pants and drop my pants in the foyer there. So now I'm standing in my underwear, and my mom comes around the corner, hearing me breathing, hearing me kind of hysterical. And there I am standing with my pants around my ankles, right? Like fanning my thighs, because I decided to wear corduroys to school on a hot day. And I to this day, I've never worn another pair of corduroys. And it's a joke in my family, and all of my wife's friends know about it. They threw a corduroy party one day. They didn't tell me about it. I show up, and everyone's wearing corduroys. I immediately started sweating as soon as I walked in and realized what everyone was doing.
That is a fantastic story. And I don't think I've ever told you this because I don't know where it came from in my memory, but when my kids were growing up, I would always go in before they went to bed, and I'd either read them a book or I'd tell them a story. Well, I always had this fictional character I basically called Willy Wonka. not the Chocolate Factory, but they hadn't watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory at the time. But the whole story was about this kid who would walk to school, and every day he'd walk to school, he would come up to this scary house that had this fence and had this dog behind it, and it would run back and forth and bark at these kids. Well, over time, the one kid got so scared, his teacher said, "Hey, why are you scared when you come to school? You're always sweating and you're hot. And why don't and so he told her the story about the dog. And she said, "Well, why don't you give him a dog treat?" And so every day he'd go by and he'd throw a dog treat to the dog until one day he came and the dog was sitting there and he wasn't chasing him and the dog were best friends forever. So that story, I don't know where I came up with it, but after hearing you tell that in a little more detail, obviously I've heard it many times. I think that's where I came up with it. So that was that story of yours with the corduroys was embedded into my kids' head from when they were, little kids who wanted to hear the story about Willy Wonka. Well, actually, now, kids, if you're listening to this, it's a story about Shawn Eddy.
It's about a fat kid named Shawn Eddy.
Oh, well, that's great, man. That's a great story. So you're Columbus, Ohio. What school did you go to? What was your friends like in school? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I went to elementary, middle school, all that fun stuff. Got to high school. Went to Independence High School, which is on the east side of town.
Which is an inner city. I mean, that's a public school.
Public school.
Yep.
Yeah, public school. Part of the Columbus Public program. Played sports there. I had a bit of a unique high school experience in that one, it was a very diverse student body, but then I spent my last 2 years in high school, actually attending another high school in the Columbus Public program. It was a math and science program sponsored by Battelle Labs, and they picked, it was like a handful, roughly a dozen kids from each of the 17 different Columbus high schools, and we would go and have this math and science program, right? We had two teachers, one math, one science, and it was a little bit of an advanced program. And I had to do science fair. What was interesting is that I was one of the few jocks that got into the program. So the other kids in the program were, your more traditional academic, right? The first day I showed up, there were a couple of kids talking about this event between two different high schools, and they were talking about how good they were. And we had just scrimmaged one of those schools in football, and we slaughtered them. But they were talking about how good they were. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? They were terrible. And so we beat them like 49-7. And they said 49-7. I said, yeah, 7 touchdowns to 1 touchdown, and they said we're talking about chess. And I thought, oh, okay, I am way out of my league here. And there were chessboards set up all over the building. We had a whole building to ourselves. It was 2 stories, probably about 15 different rooms, and all these side rooms there were chessboards set up, and these kids in between classes would run, and they'd have all these chess matches against one another. And so I started playing chess there, and I really enjoy chess to this day. I play with my kids, and but I was not very good back then. I mean, these guys were teaching me a lot, and they were just absolutely murdering me on the chessboard. And those 2 years, I won 1 match against these kids. But they would study chess books, chess theory, chess strategy, and I knew how the pieces moved, right?
Right.
And the kid I beat, his name was Chapathana Sarapoka, right? Just a brilliant kid. And I'll never forget the look on his face, because I made a move and I was like, check. And it was actually a checkmate. But to see the look on his face when he realized he just lost to me, it was like the life force had drained from his body. When I realized I won, I went running around the building screaming, I just beat Chomp. And all the other students, the teachers came running, and they're just standing around the board examining it, wanted to make sure that it was actually true, like it wasn't a mistake. And then when they realized it was actually real, the shock of everyone was something that I still relish in to this day. But I mean, I think my overall record was like 1 in 120.
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
you got the one that counted.
it was terrible, but
The one time.
so yeah.
So
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 that was
so you obviously in high school obviously played football. What other sports did you play besides football?
football and baseball were the two that I played the most of in high school. Football was definitely the sport that I was excelled at more so than when baseball. Baseball was just something I did for fun. When I was younger, I played little league ball. Made a traveling team, but we just couldn't afford to be on the team. I mean, there was just
Right.
too much travel. The expense was ridiculous, and that was nothing like it's compared to today.
Right.
So I kind of, I don't want to say lost interest in, but just I didn't work at baseball as much as I was with football. Football, we had a really strong high school program. We'd qualified for state playoffs. I had some guys that played at high level. I played with some guys that played at Michigan, played at Ohio State. So it was a good program, good coaches. One of our coaches, he's actually one of the funnier guys I've ever met. He played at Ohio State. His name was Alvin Washington. He also played for the Jets. But really, really good guy. And actually, my offensive line coach, who was probably my favorite coach. He was a chemistry teacher. One of the reasons that I liked chemistry as much as I did. He had just passed away this past year, so
Okay.
it was a bit of a sad time. But I had the benefit of really strong coaching, both from an athletic standpoint, teaching the game, how to play it, but also they were mentors in life, and that continued on into college too. I mean, Dan and I both, we played for some really strong mentors in our athletic career. So, but in high school, football was definitely my sport. Even when I was playing baseball, I was still lifting and working out for football. And the coaches knew that our baseball team wasn't that good that I needed to really pick. I wasn't, my lack of commitment to them wasn't really interfering with the overall performance of the team. I think our infield averaged like 220 pounds. We were just a bunch of big old boys playing baseball and having fun with it. So, but football is definitely where I knew I had some more opportunity to play at the next level than in baseball.
So kind of talk about that a little bit. You're having some success in high school football. You're a big kid. You're a fast kid. You're athletic. You got what kind of opportunities did you have as far as colleges go, and why did you choose the college that you did choose?
Well, it was interesting when I got to my freshman year, the summer before my freshman year, when I got to conditioning. So here I am, a big kid, had played various sports, as a younger man, and the coaches started to see something in me. Right when we're doing drills, I had good footwork, so I was quick and I was fast. I could move, particularly for a bigger guy. And the year before, we had a group of freshmen that came in, and they were really athletic guys. These are the guys that ended up going to Ohio State, Michigan. One of them played at Butler, which was a school in our conference. So it seemed like, oh, here's another one of those guys. They would say, they start testing you out. And they're like, all right, he can run. He can move, right? Side to side movement's good. He's got, I was relatively in shape after working with them. So, I could do some endurance stuff. I mean, nothing, I wasn't running like 5Ks, but running a mile I could do in a decent time, which was more than enough for football. But then it came down to, all right, so I had passed all of those tests, let's say. And then it came down to the first day of pads was, well, let's see how tough this kid is. And as a freshman, I'll never forget this. There were two guys on the team, two seniors on the team, Dwayne Gordon and Dwayne Hall, and they were just two massive men, right? Men among boys. And there's no better way to test the toughness of a kid than the Oklahoma drill. And so here I am as a freshman going against Dwayne Hall. And Dwayne is one of those guys, when he got to college, he was in a fraternity. I can't remember which one, but it had something to do with the letter A, alpha, right? Because he branded his arm with the letter A. And it is just, he had the biggest arms I've ever seen on anyone in my life, right? And I had to go, and I was scared to death. I'm lying there with the football in my hands, on my back, staring at the sky, praying to God that I'm not murdered in the next 5 seconds. And the whistle blew, and I got up, and we hit, and we stalemated. And we both kind of fell off of one another and then down to the ground. And that moment for me was one that said, all right, you might have something here.
Yeah.
And it made my high school experience that much easier because I just went toe to toe with one of the bigger guys on the team. Right. And we helped each other up kind of, and he, was like, nice job, little man. And away we went. Right. So
whole new level of respect from the older guys.
Exactly. And then, I had to continue to prove myself, but I ended up playing as a freshman, and then we made playoffs my sophomore year. That was the best team that I was on. We had some real talent. Our quarterback went to Brown and played. Our running back went to Michigan. He was actually on the '97 national championship team. He ended up transferring to Eastern Illinois after that. He was a running back for us, but he was like 5'7", a buck 70. Michigan wanted him to play cornerback because he ran we had clocked him at a 4.3 40. Michigan supposedly clocked him at a 4.2 something.
Jeez.
It was enough for him to get a full ride to Michigan, right? So I've heard stories all over the years. I've heard he ran a 4.14. I heard he ran a 4.2. Whatever it was fast enough that Michigan gave him a full ride. So he was on the national championship team in '97. Played with Brady, but he wanted to play running back. So he ended up transferring to Eastern Illinois and had a good career there, as a running back. But just he wasn't big enough to play running back in the Big Ten back then. But, those guys are all good guys. Culturally, we just came from different worlds. I was a bit of a nerd. Those guys were into things that I just couldn't wrap my head around. So I didn't come out of high school with as many friends as I thought I would. And going through that recruiting process, I think the biggest school, or not I think, but the biggest school that was interested in me was West Virginia. My biggest problem, though, was I didn't believe in myself enough. I wasn't confident enough to really push myself to be what I could have been. And it's something that I talk to my kids about today, is that I don't know how good I could have been. And I think, you hear people say that there's everyone says that, it's the Uncle Rico, right? Man, if I didn't get hurt, I'd be playing in the pros right now type. But it's a little deeper than that. I think every athlete has to contend with the end of their career at some point. And the better you are, the longer it takes you to get there. But for me, because I didn't believe in myself enough, I don't know how good or how bad I really was. Right. Because I was always timid. I never left it all out there.
And I think that's an important, what you just said about confidence. I had the same thing, and Ben and I've talked about it, with our kids is you can see it. Like I can see with coaching young kids and being around high school kids, you can see the talent, like you can see how much potential a kid has. But if they don't have the confidence and the belief in themselves, they're not going to reach that. And as a young kid, when you're you got so many things thrown at you. Your body's changing, your mind's not developed. You got, especially now, this day and age is way different than when you and I were there with social media and, all the distractions in life. All it takes, it seems like, for these kids now is, one negative word or negative post, and their confidence is shot. And, um, I think it's important note what you just said is, in your mind, I mean, you're living your life now just wondering, man, if I would have done this or if I would have done that, could I went to West Virginia?
Mhm.
Confidence is such an important thing for these young kids, and trying to pump them up to so that they'll be able to achieve the things that they can achieve.
Well, there's something that I've come across recently, and it was said by Jordan Peterson, who is the author of that book that I just sent you. And it's not in the book, but it was something that he said on I think it might even been the Joe Rogan podcast when he was on there, when he said it originally. But he has been asked multiple times about, does he believe in God? And he's always skirted the question, and it really frustrates some people when they're asking it. But there's a reason he skirts the question. And when you sit down and you take the time to listen to him explain it, it ties into what we were just talking about. And it all comes down to, what do you mean by believe? Because we say that we believe in something, right? We believe in Santa Claus. We believe in the Easter Bunny. We believe in God, right? Well, what does that mean to believe in something? In today's world, belief is, yeah, I believe. It's a statement. It's a declaration. But unless you believe it to the point where it changes, it alters who you are and what you do, then can you really claim that you believe in it? And Jordan Peterson was in Fort Worth, and he wrote a new book that's not yet out, and it's called We Who Wrestle with God. So I went to the talk, and it's built on this premise of belief and believing in something, whatever that is. And after leaving the talk, I thought, man, if I had believed in myself, how would that have changed what I did, or how I did what I did? And so now I have Liz, who's just technically graduated from high school. And I say technically because she's already finished her first semester at SMU. But if she truly believed in her ability, how would that change how she approaches the game of soccer? Because in her career, the moments that she is at her best is when you can tell that she's confident in who she is and what she can do. And she doesn't let the outside world in to her head and to detract from what it is that she's trying to do. So sometimes she'll take a shot that I'm like, why did she even think that was possible? But she scored the goal, right? It's from a crazy angle. It's from a tight window, whatever it might be. But it was because she wasn't worried about either the failure or what people were thinking. She just believed in herself. And when you sit back and think, if I truly believe in something, then that is going to alter who I am and what I do. And that's obviously incredibly important in your belief in God, right? But it's also comes down to believing in yourself and what it is that you do. And if I had believed in myself back when I was playing high school football, could I have gone to a different school? Could I have gotten a full scholarship? That type of stuff. I don't know. And that's what I tell my kids now is, I didn't believe in myself to even try, right? I might have failed still, right? Odds are that I would have. But now I'm left with this nagging kind of question of, how good was I really, right? And that's nothing to take away from where I ended up going. The University of Dayton was a great program. I wouldn't, if I could go back, I don't know if I would, because I wouldn't have met my wife, Melissa, and I wouldn't have the 4 kids that I have now. So just because I feel this way doesn't mean that things ended up poorly, but it does leave a little bit of a question in my mind as to how good was I, right? And I'm trying to teach my kids to not leave that on the table, right? To take that off the table and say, I know the answer to that question, whatever it is, right? I can tell you right now that they're better athletes than I was, right?
Well, I can tell you that too, because I went against you. And pretty sure, kind of dominated you a couple of times.
And some of our best conversations when I was laying on top of you after pancake, talking about what we're going to do after practice.
Let's clarify. Because if somebody just came into this and heard that, we want to specify we're talking about football.
Okay.
So no, Shawn, I agree with you 100%. I think, I've never really thought about it that way as far as belief. But you're right. If you truly believe in something, people are going to know. They're not even going to have to ask you, because it's going to radiate from you, whether that's your faith belief or your confidence in yourself. I think it's going to radiate from you if you truly believe. But how do we get these young kids? How do I get my kids, to understand that? How do you get your kids to understand? You just have those conversations and try to build up their confidence. I mean, what's the way to do that so that they don't run into the same, where you're at 46, 47 years. How old are you? I'm 45.
I'm 46.
Yeah. So you're 46 years old. You don't want them to be thinking that, you want them to, you've got a daughter playing Division I college soccer at SMU. You want her to be the best that she can be. And you know that even though she is a phenomenal soccer player, how much better she can be. So how do you get that into them?
For me, it's taking from my own life the lessons that I've learned. And I wish I had, you hear this all the time, but I wish I would have known then what I know now. But what I've done differently, let's say the last 5 years, that I wasn't doing then, is I wasn't working on myself as much as I should have been back then. I wasn't working to understand who I was, what I wanted to be, right? I was just letting life happen to me. And when I decided to take the reins and to work to dictate more of what was going to happen instead of letting it happen, is when I started to learn a lot of this stuff. So like we talked about, one of the questions you had sent me was about motivation. And I don't think I understood motivation. I thought motivation was the thing that made you get out of bed. And yes, that's like the definition. That's what people understand it to be. But really, motivation is what you're trying to get to. And I had kind of misinterpreted that, as I thought that was motivation was the little fire that you had inside of you that gets you to your goal. But motivation really is the goal. It's the discipline that is the fire that gets you to the motivation, right? That gets you to a goal. I didn't understand that nuanced difference there. So working with Liz, it's we're trying to get her to understand that, what do you want? First of all, you got to be able to see it, right? So you have to define that. And then understanding that motivation isn't enough. The goal isn't enough. You have to discipline yourself to get to that goal, because discipline is what gets you out of bed in the morning, right? And you've seen this, Dan, when we've been texting each other back and forth during 75 hard, and it's 5 o'clock in the morning and you need to get up and your body is wrecked. And sometimes that text of, hey, get up, don't quit, like, that's enough. That's the discipline that gets you to the goal. And it's important to know the difference between those two things. I've talked a lot with Elizabeth about, you're going to have to make a sacrifice in your life. And you're either going to choose the sacrifice, or the sacrifice is going to choose you. But at the end of the day, there's a sacrifice. And I wish I would have known that back when I was in college or even high school, because I would have sacrificed maybe some more time with friends or doing some of the fun things that I wanted to do, and focused a little bit more on the stuff that I should have done to get me to where I wanted to go. And Liz is starting to understand that. And that was part of the reason that she struggled a little bit with the first semester at SMU, because she has a goal to play professionally, and she's working her butt. She's putting in the time, and she's spending the time at the gym. She's spending the time at the training facility. She's spending the time at the dinner table, right? Eating the stuff that she's supposed to eat to make sure that she's the fittest that she can possibly be. And the sacrifice that she's making now is that she's not spending time with the girls on the team in the way that they want her to. Right? They want her to go out and party. I mean, part of this is she was only 17 when she first started. And some of these girls are 21, some are even 22 because of COVID years. So that's a significant gap in that point in your life, right? That 5-year gap versus someone who's 45 and 40, 17 and 22 is a pretty big gap.
Yeah, that's a big gap maturity wise. That's a big gap just, in overall life lessons. And then you've got, not only, you got a 17-year-old who reported to school to college, in the middle of her senior year of high school. That's a big deal. That's a big thing. Just I think for any kid, not only a kid who's going to be playing a Division I sport, to go through those emotions of being out of the nest, being away from home, and then throw that sport on top of it, and then the college classes and the loads that's difficult. So it's, I think it would be a struggle for it. I think the first semester of college for most kids is a struggle, whether, just the life change itself or just trying to figure out, okay, should I party every night or should I study every night? I mean, those are big turning points in your life that can go either direction. So it's, it's completely understandable to see why she would have struggled a little bit here, her first semester.
Yeah. And she had to sacrifice her senior year of high school soccer to do this. High school soccer in Texas is a winter sport, whereas up in, most other parts of the country, it's a fall sport. So those kids that are leaving early to go to that spring semester, like with football, they still get to play their senior year of high school, and then they move on to college. Well, in Liz's situation, she had to give up that senior year, so there was a sacrifice she made. I mean, as a junior, she was offensive MVP of the team. She had all these, all district, all region awards, things like that, and most likely she would have dominated. Her senior year, actually, a team in her district won the state championship, and it's a team that they beat, I think twice the year before. So I think she looks back at that and thinks, well, did I make the wrong decision? But when she looks at it and she frames it in this is where I want to go, this is what I want to do. So I'd like to play at the professional level. I'd like to play on the national team, something like that. That sacrifice is something that she's willing to do. But if you take that out, if you take that goal away, then all of a sudden that sacrifice that she made isn't worth it. So it's getting her focused back onto that goal and framing it so that way that motivation and that discipline are there to get her to where she wants to go. And then recognizing that the sacrifice needs to be made. I'm having this conversation with my oldest boy, George, who just finished his sophomore year of high school. He's a very good athlete. June 15th is coming up, and that's the first day that colleges are allowed to reach out to him. His club coach says that there are some schools interested, so we'll see who calls on the 15th. So that's kind of an exciting time. But we're having those conversations with him now about his purpose. What does he want? And that's tough to ask a kid who's 16 years old. What do you want out of life, right? I know I didn't know at the time. I just thought, well, I need to go to college because that's what everyone does. So we're having those conversations with him. What do you want? How do you want to do it? but more importantly, what are you going to give up to get there? Because that's probably more important than what it is that you want. Because if you fall into those traps of trying to do everything, then you're going to end up getting nothing. Jordan Peterson talks about this in a bit of a different way. He relates it to the story of Peter Pan, and I had never ever heard this related in this way, but it was fascinating to hear him do it. And I'm not going to do this justice, but the name Pan is significant because it's the god of everything in different cultures. So that's why he's called Peter Pan. And Captain Hook, the hook represents something that you've lost. And the reason that the alligator or the crocodile is chasing Captain Hook with the clock in it is because that's time chasing us down. And ultimately, time is going to win, and time is going to be the end of us all. And Peter Pan is struggling with essentially maturity, growing up and accepting responsibility for what he is. And Wendy in the story represents that mature counterpart, right? That has accepted her mortality and knows that maturing is just a part of life and something that you need to do. And she has accepted that and embraced it. And she wants to have a family. And she wants Peter to be the guy that she starts that life with, but he's struggling with becoming a man and accepting responsibility. And Tinkerbell is the fairy tale image of what he wants. And she represents whatever he wants in the moment. And when he lays it out in that way, and he talks about how we're fighting against time, and there are instances in where we have to grow up before it's too late. It's really a fascinating interpretation of it. And Tinkerbell can represent all different things in a young man's life that can be problematic. One is porn, right? Porn is this fairy tale thing that gets us by without having to be the real thing. And we don't have to do any of the work to get to the real thing because it's just there. It's just accessible. But how problematic that has become in our society, right? It's something that we've had tough conversations with our kids about, because now they have a device sitting in their pocket that allows them access to this world. I've got their phones and computers on lockdowns with filters and all that stuff, but that doesn't mean that the kid sitting next to them on the bus on some soccer trip has the same on his phone, right? So yeah. My son's come home and said, "Hey, yeah, Dad, I saw this. Don't know what to think about it, but."
Right. Yeah, those are tough conversations, but they're conversations that need to be had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to sacrificing and delaying your life. There's some things that our kids have to contend with that we never had to deal with. I mean, think of it in that regard. If there was motivation for us, in a lot of sense, came because of women, right? We wanted to make ourselves better because we wanted to date somebody, right? We wanted a girl to like us, and we knew that we had to make something of ourselves to be able to do so. Like, these girls didn't want to date just some old loser, right? They wanted someone that was formidable in life. Well, in today's world, these kids have access to some of the most beautiful women ever in their phones. And with things like OnlyFans, you can pay a monthly fee to have live conversations with some of these people. So you take that motivation away, right? What's going to happen? And I think you start to see some of this in society, where we have these failures to launch, these kids that aren't getting out of the house, they aren't making something of themselves, because there isn't a motivating factor to get them there. There isn't something that's forcing them to make something of themselves, to make themselves formidable in life. So they just stay where they are. They stay as Peter, because they can live in this fairy tale world and get all of the stuff that they're looking for without having to do anything to get it. And I think it is one of the more social problems that we're going to have to deal with, or social problems that we're going to have to deal with in in our lifetime. And it's something that I'm fighting every day with my kids to make sure they understand that there is something to putting yourself out there, to making yourself a formidable force in this life, and not settling for the instant gratification that exists in today's world.
Yeah, and you're right. That's so different from what we grew up with. And, these devices, I mean, you've got the world at your fingertips. You got a question about anything, you just ask it and it'll tell you, it'll give you a video, it'll break everything down. And it, makes life so easy for them in a sense that they don't have to work to figure things out. Where, when you and I were in school, we'd have to read an encyclopedia, right? If we wanted to know, if we wanted to know history or we wanted to know about a certain topic, we actually had to find a book, the right letter of the book, pull it out and read it. Um, yeah, it's I think what it's doing is it's creating weak men. Um, and and I think with weak men, we have weak families. We have a godless society. I think I don't know where to go with it other than to do exactly what you're doing, is to have these conversations with your kids, to push them to be outside of their regular self, and try to introduce themselves to people and try to get involved and be a positive influence on their friends and on other people, to try to get them out of that phone or that tablet, and to recognize that, man, you got to have conversations with people, and you got to recognize why certain kids in your class may act out a certain way compared to how you do. There's so many different things for these kids growing up that is, man, they can go down a rabbit hole and can get really lost.
And I think what's really scary is it's becoming morally acceptable, a lot of these things. It's becoming the norm and acceptable. A lot of the bad habits and everything that happen like that. Like, you go to a ball game or anything anymore, all the kids are on their phones. They're not, conversating, not having fun with their friends or anything like that. They'd rather be on their phone and their social networks. And I think that's one of the things that's really scary as well.
Yeah, I lost you guys for a second there, so I'm not sure what you heard me say, and I just jumped back on here, but yeah, Ben, I think you're absolutely right. The interaction, the social interaction doesn't exist, even though these kids now interact with each other in the room, but it's still on their phone, right? So there is some type of interaction, but it's all through this filter now. And we have friends that are on Facebook, and I know their marriage isn't as strong as they make it look on social media. They're having problems. And I think that's a weakness in society, because I know for me, one of the things that I struggled with was intimacy. And, growing up, I thought intimacy was basically sex, right? I mean, as a kid, you'd look at the JCPenney catalog in the Sunday newspaper, and they had the intimate section, right? Which was just a bunch of bra and panties. And I thought that's what it was. But intimacy is really about connecting with someone on a personal level and being able to share your thoughts and your feelings, and work through some of those things. And we're losing that because everything is now filtered. Some of the best conversations that I've had have happened on a boat in the middle of nowhere, Canada, when it's just been myself and someone else there with me, because you really are allowed to open up and say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what I'm doing. I've had this happen to me. I've had that happen to me, and then get to hear their experience. And then you realize that somebody else is going through this as well. And that's why when it comes to important people in my life, like Melissa, instrumental into my growth, because she's represented that person that I'm able to say all of those things to without that judgment, without that fear of being abandoned, because she made that to me in marriage. Like, I'm going to see this through. I'm going to stick with you no matter what happens. And that freedom allows you to open up and say, hey, I'm dealing with this. I'm struggling with that. And these kids today they're not getting any of that, because the world filters, the way they communicate hasn't attached to it, right? It's forcing them into a direction. They're not able to just think and blurt something out without that fear of judgment, because everyone's judging. And and we've opened up pulled the curtain, and we let everyone in on everything. So it's a problem in today's world.
It is, and I think a lot of it. I think life's just too easy. I think we as a society in most cases have so much more than what we truly need. And um, when you go through struggle in life, you talked about growing up, and I know your family was from the coal mines, and I know your Uncle Reed, he grew up in that same town. And I mean, we could talk about him and his family and how your mom grew up. That could be a whole nother episode. Um, but those were tough times. But look at how someone like your Uncle Reed, who was a superintendent who played football at West Virginia, just an absolutely unbelievable man, with outstanding character, grew up with nothing, right? And these kids today have everything. I mean, they're carrying, in most cases. I mean, I've got 5 kids. That my youngest doesn't have a phone yet, but so there's 6 $1,000 devices in their hand. Each person's got $1,000 device that can tell them anything and everything they want to know at any single second of any single day. Um, I just think things are so easy, and I think that just makes everyone soft.
Yeah, it's that phrase, and I think I cut out when I was saying this, but it was that Joe Rogan, hard times make tough men make easy times make weak men,
Yeah.
kind of idea. And we've gone through some really tough times. And not just us, but actually generations before us went through really tough times. Like you talk about world wars and things of that nature. Those are much tougher than anything I've ever had to deal with. And now we're on the flip side. We've had easy times. And what the byproduct of that is you're seeing weaker and weaker men. But I'm glad you brought up Uncle Reed, because he's been a huge influence in my life, and I wanted to make sure we got to at least talk about him and his boys, just that family in general. I mean, Uncle Reed, Aunt Marcia, both Pete and Scott were big components of my life growing up. I idolized Pete and Scott. They were older than I was. They both played sports. They from a small town in Eastern Ohio called Belair. It was like they were always in the paper. I mean, I think some of that had to do with the fact that they were good at what they did, and I think there were only 30 people that lived in the town, so they didn't really have much to write about. But I thought they were just the coolest thing ever. And then you have Uncle Reed, right, who came from everything that you just mentioned about the coal mining town, went to West Virginia, was a football coach, became a principal, turned out to be, became a superintendent. And for me, every time he would come to visit, or every time we went to go visit him, he always made me feel like something special, right? He was always excited to see me. And I thought that was awesome. I wanted to be like him. He would show up at the house. He'd come to Columbus for conventions, for education or whatever, and he'd be in a nice car. And I thought, man, I hope I'm like that. And he had two great kids who were successful, and I thought, man, that's what I want to be. And it was interesting because my summer before my senior year of college, he took me to Canada as an early graduation gift. And Dan and I, we were living together at the time, and I went on the trip and fell in love with Canada. It's something that we still do to this day. It's such an amazing trip with good people. But over those years, I got to hear the stories of where my uncle struggled, and his life wasn't as picture perfect as I thought it was. And he was fired from being a coach, and he had board members that didn't like him or what he was doing as superintendent, and was causing problems for him. And to hear someone that I had idolized and essentially thought was perfect going through those struggles and having those trials and tribulations in his life, I was a little shocked, because I never got to see any of that. I never felt any of that. And it wasn't until I was, probably in my 30s, that I had realized that it wasn't because he didn't go through those things, but it was because he was strong enough and valued me enough to always put his best foot forward when it came to me. And if there's something that he's taught me, is that you always save your best for those that matter the most. It doesn't matter. Getting a little choked up.
He's a good man.
It doesn't matter what you're going through, but you can always find the strength to put your best foot forward, to be the best that you can be for them. And I thought, holy cow, that's such an important thing. So when I'm dealing with my world, when I'm having a bad day at work, and look, I work in the steel industry now. I buy scrap for a living, and Dan, you've taken scrap to a scrap yard. You know what those places are like, right? There's some tough old coots working there.
Yeah.
So a lot of my day is spent trying to convince. I jokingly say this, but there's a lot of truth to it. I try and convince a self-made millionaire that his scrap is worth less than he thinks it is. So think about how much fun that is, right?
Yeah.
So when I have a stressful day, and I'm coming home from work, I've learned from Uncle Reed that you got to let that go, because the kids don't deserve that. Melissa doesn't deserve that, right? You want to be the best you can be for those guys. So I figured out ways to internalize that and then deal with it at a different time. So that way, when I am trying to be a husband, trying to be a father, I'm not letting that impact who I am and how I do what I do.
Right.
Because being my best for them is probably the most important thing that I do. So yeah.
Yeah, you're 100% right. In fact, I actually, with running a business and having employees, and I had to have a conversation with one early this morning that I was kind of dreading, because I kind of knew where it was going to go, and I worried about it most of the day yesterday, and woke up this morning at 3:30 in the morning worrying about it. And every morning, I go to the Y at 5 in the morning, and my youngest son Ryan, he wants to go every day with me. And this morning I'm up at 3:30, thinking about this conversation, and which way is it going to go, and it's like, man, I don't want to go work out, I don't want to do that, but I realized, hey, just like what you said, you gotta put your best foot forward for your kids, or for whoever's looking at you. And so we went to the Y, we had a workout, we played our little basketball game that we played, and he played with a smile on his face, and I came home feeling much better about that, because I sometimes it takes different events in life or different conversations that you're going to have with someone to really make you look at things and say, you know what, that's not that big of a deal in the whole scheme of things. What is that big of a deal is making sure that I keep that smile on my son's face. I keep pushing him to be the best that he can be, and that I'm there for him. Not that I say, hey, buddy, I can't do it today. I got too much going on. And I think that's what, Uncle Reed was, and it still is for you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just that stoic man who, throughout his life, dealt with all kinds of adversity, being in a school system. And I can't imagine being a superintendent and all the things that they have to deal with, not only from teachers and parents and just the community in general. That's a tough, stressful job. And I'm like you, being invited, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years ago, whenever you guys invited me to go on a fishing trip. It was, and this, I mean, it is the greatest. It's the thing that I look forward to the most every year, is going with us 4, 5, or 6 guys who typically go. And it's not about the fishing. It's great fishing, but it's about those conversations on the boat that you and I have had, that Uncle Reed and I had, that Scott and I had, Charles. I mean, it's just such a great group of guys, and I feel like, it's very therapeutic because there's only so many people you can talk to in life and open up to about what you're dealing with, or circumstances that that have been handed to you, and how to manage those and what to do. And you are one of those guys for me. And and that trip is a valuable trip.
But it's funny you say that because when we needed a guy and we were looking for that fourth that year, the first year that you went, there was a whole vetting process that you had to go through that you weren't even aware of. But it kind of ties into something else that I work on with my kids. But the questions that I had to answer on your behalf, like this, I felt like I was being interrogated, because it is important that you take the right person up there, because you're going to be in the middle of nowhere. In some cases, you're the only other guy on the boat, and if you take the wrong guy, it can turn into a pretty unpleasant experience.
Yeah.
Scott, which is Uncle Regis' youngest son, who's older than I am, but he was just, what's he like? Does he like to play cards? Does he do this? Does he do that? I'm like, yes, but like, trust me, guys, he's gonna fit in. And then obviously you have, and I mean you've been on, I can't even remember how many trips it's been now, but there's no question, like, should we ask Dan? It's like Dan's always in, right? He's won the lifetime invitation award,
lifetime achievement award.
Yeah. But what was interesting about that, that vetting process is I think as kids in particular now, like, or not just kids, but in general, we are all judged, whether we want to be judged or not. People are always making judgments about us. And when Liz was in elementary school, she came home from school. She had on these pretty pink boots. They were like a velvet or suede type boot, and they had the little tassels hanging from them, whatever. She thought they were the cutest thing in the world. And there was a girl at school that didn't like them. She kept stepping on Liz's feet to get them dirty. And it really bothered Liz. And she was calling Liz ugly and saying the shoes are terrible and all of this stuff. And, each one of my kids, I've got Liz is my oldest, who just turned 18 in May. And then George is my oldest boy, who's 16. I've got Hank, who's 14 and just started freshman year, or going to be starting freshman year in high school. And then Charlie, who is our youngest, who is going into 6th grade. So we're officially out of elementary school now. So all of this stuff we're talking about is that much more important, because all of these kids now are getting to a point in their life where this stuff matters. But when Liz was dealing with this, it was clear to me that it came down to, she was worried about what too many other people were saying to her and thinking about her. And Melissa and I had talked about, how do we teach her that you don't let people judge you, right? You get a choice in who you let impact your life. And I came up with this crazy story. It was based on, I was in high school, I was out on the football field, there was an injury timeout, and I was joking with my teammates about these 3 old guys that used to run the chains at our football games. They were the volunteers that get in for free. They'd run the first down marker. And it kept them close to the game, but they were a bunch of old coots, right? And I remember joking with my teammates about them judging us. I was like, look at those old farts over there judging us, right? Like, if we don't get 10 yards, we're not very good. Had a little bit of laugh about it. But then it occurred to me that we have a say in who gets to judge us in our life, right? And who you let judge you has a major impact on who you are, because the wrong person judging you and the wrong person influencing your world can send you down the wrong path. So it's just as important that you understand that you have a choice in who judges you, and making sure that you only let those who are worthy of it impact or influence who you are and what you do. And so I turned that into kind of a quick little phrase of who's holding the sticks, meaning those three old farts on the sideline that were holding the first down marker and the yard marker. I allowed them to judge us. I allowed the football team allowed them to judge us. So I think about that in my world, and I tell my kids that all the time when they'll come home and say, "Hey, so and so said this to me." I'll just say, "Well, are they holding the sticks? Who's holding the sticks here, right? Who is it that you're letting judge you right now?" If that person is just some random kid in school, they have no sway over you. So don't worry about it. Just let it roll off, right? You're done. Now, if it's mom, if it's dad, if it's a coach, if it's God, right? Like those are the people, right, that you need to listen to, that those are the people that should be influencing your life. So it's a way to filter out all of that BS that's in the world today, and you can focus on those who are actually caring for you, those who want to see you be better than themselves. And I've told all of my kids that. I said, there are very few people in this world other than mom and dad who want to see you be more successful than we are, right? And I said, always remember that. So when I get preachy, and I can, as you can tell from this podcast, I can be that sometimes. But when I get preachy, understand where it's coming from. It's because I want you to be better than me.
And that's an important thing with social media, because so many kids, are using the likes, how many likes they have, or how many followers they have, and they're letting that, you know, influence their life, good or bad. And at the end of the day, none of that crap matters. It doesn't matter. You're right. The only people that you should let judge you are the people who you truly care about, and they care about you.
Right.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Who's holding the sticks? I think that's awesome. I'm going to use it.
Feel free. I mean, it's helped because the kids, to your point, Dan, there's so much more judgment that occurs today because we've pulled back the curtain on our lives. We put it all out there on social media. Sometimes it's not intentional, but sometimes it's because it's us as parents. We're saying, "Hey, look at what we're doing." With my move from Ohio to Louisiana to Texas, Facebook, social media, that's a way that I interact and keep in touch with people that I don't get to see very often. I mean, we're talking years now have gone by when I haven't gotten to see some of these family members who I would spend, almost every major holiday with. I mean, growing up, I would, Thanksgiving was kind of all over the place depending on where we were, but Christmas Eve was at one aunt and uncle's. Christmas Day was at another's, and New Year's Eve was always at my house, right? And that's just how it was. Now I live in Texas, and we don't have anyone close. So this is how we stay in touch with distant family, is through social media. But with that, putting that out there into the ether, now you have so many other people that are invited into your world, and they can say whatever they want to say. And not that I have a bunch of negative stuff on my social media page, but you do allow that, you do invite that when you put that out there. I've got some athletic kids, and there's been some trash talk about should they have gotten this or versus that, and so and so was better, and whatever it is. And 20 years ago,
you got to teach them to put those blinders on and get back to that focus of who truly matters most.
Right. Who are you allowing to influence your life when you go back who are you allowing to influence your life when you go back to that idea of belief that we talked about, right? And if you believe it, it's going to impact who you are and what you do. Well, if that person that's judging you, that's saying, what, you didn't deserve that award. George won MVP of his team this year as a sophomore on the soccer team. He was sophomore of the year in the district. As a sophomore, he's ranked he's in the top 5 in goals scored for his high school, right? As a
hold
sophomore.
On here, Shawn. Hold on. Let's make sure everybody understands. We're not talking like the small little towns that Ben and I are from. You're talking McKinney, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, Texas. if you saw, I mean, just do a Google search of what's the high school stadium called?
It's McKinney ISD Stadium.
So look up McKinney ISD Stadium to look at where Shawn's kids play soccer. This is, I mean, when you hear the quintessential Texas high school football, Texas high school sports, I mean, I mean, this is big time.
It's a nicer stadium than Dan and I played in college.
That's true. Very true.
I mean, yeah, it's the biggest division in Texas. You know, it's 6A. That's the largest division. That's the biggest high school. The town that we live in, McKinney, Texas. It's a beautiful town. It's got 3 high schools. You know, Liz's graduating class is, I think, 600-ish. You know, for her senior class. So, you know, this is big time. This is big time athletics. George and Liz's club team both qualified for the national tournament in the ECNL, which stands for Elite Club National League. It's generally considered to be the best soccer league that you can play in the country. There's exceptions, obviously, depending on where you are in the country. But you know, George's team, we got to go to San Diego at the end of this month for him to play in the national tournament. He's got 3 games in group play, and then if they make it out of group play, he'll play the first. I think it's the Sweet 16 game on during that week while we're out in San Diego. And if they win that game, then we have to go to Virginia to finish out the tournament. So he's playing at a very high level, and he's doing very well. I mean, he is by far the best athlete in that I've seen up close, right? And the fact that he came from my loins, I still can't figure out how that happened.
But need to check the mailman in Cincinnati.
Well, honestly, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Melissa was as good as she was in college, and that her father was a dual scholarship tennis and soccer athlete at Morehead State back when he played. So as much as I want to think they got their athletic ability from me, I'm pretty sure they have a lot to do with it as well. So.
Well, hey, we need to land this plane, because I think we could probably sit here and talk for 8 hours. And we will do this again, because there's no doubt you've got a lot of valuable insight. There's so many things I wanted to hit on that we haven't got to. So we're going to do this again. Otherwise, we're going to be on here for 4 hours. So I want to land the plane here and just, are there any closing thoughts or words of wisdom or advice that you can give to anybody listening this podcast? And remember, you know, as of right now, you're talking to about 400 people in Preble County, Ohio, rural America. But hopefully with you being on here, we'll get some down in Dallas, Texas, and hopefully this thing will grow. But any closing thoughts, any words of wisdom, any advice you can give to our listeners from your experiences that we've just learned a lot about and heard a lot about your family and your kids and you growing up? Is there anything you can finish this podcast off with today?
I would say put the work into yourself, right? If I were to give you a starting point in doing so, is grab the book 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I read that 2 years ago, and it has been instrumental in kind of redefining who I am and what I'm trying to do. And this is something that we've already touched on a little bit, but it's the understanding that sacrifice is a part of life. And as soon as you recognize that you either choose the sacrifice or the sacrifice chooses you, then your life can be insurmountably better. Take control of it. Don't let the world dictate what you're going to do or what you're going to become. And it's understanding that you make the sacrifice now to be what you want, or the world's going to choose for you, and you're most likely not going to like the sacrifice that you're forced to make versus the one that you get to make. So that's what I'd end with.
I think that's fantastic. I think it's great for the advice, and I'm right there with you. In the last 2 years, I've learned that, okay, I got to get myself right. I got to get my body right. I got to get my mind right. Otherwise, there's going to be other things that are going to dictate my life, and I don't want that. So a great piece of advice, Shawn. I can't tell you what our friendship means to me. I can't tell you, how important you and your family are in my life. I wish you would move back this way to be a little closer so our kids could have some more time together. But I understand that's not going to happen. You guys are in a good spot, and you're doing big things down there, and those kids are phenomenal. So really appreciate your time, and I think we need to do this again.
Absolutely. All the same to you. I mean, I think the last time we got the families together, it was funny because when we left, my kids asked me, "Do you guys even really like each other?" Because all we did was make fun of each other for 2 days. But that's what being close and understanding our strengths, our weaknesses, and being able to talk about it and push each other is really all about. So yeah, I mean, your friendship is a big part of my life, and I can't thank you enough for it. And the fact that you get to go to Canada says everything. I mean, that's my letting you into that world. I mean, that's a big thing.
I earned that, buddy. I earned that.
You definitely did. So.
All right, buddy. Great catching up. We'll do this again, and give our best to Melissa and the kids.
You do the same. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. See you, man.
Thank you for listening to the BeTempered podcast. If you like what you heard, please be sure to share with your friends and family. Also, give us a like on Facebook and Instagram. We appreciate your time. Go out and be tempered.